I watched the HOA president pour industrial chemicals across the hood of my $400,000 Rolls-Royce. Then she picked up a sledgehammer. The windshield exploded into a spiderweb of cracks. She was laughing. She thought I was just another quiet neighbor who'd roll over and disappear. What she didn't know was that I'd spent 12 years in military intelligence, planning operations where one mistake meant lives lost. And she just made hers. 6 months later, she stood in front of a judge, trying to explain why she destroyed property she never had the authority to touch. But by then, it wasn't just about the car anymore. That was the moment everything changed. Before we jump into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you've ever had a crazy HOA moment, hit subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. I bought the house in Maplewood Estates because it was quiet. Clean streets. Manicured lawns. The kind of place where people smiled when they walked their dogs. I just finished my last deployment and wanted something stable. Something predictable. The Rolls-Royce was a gift to myself after 12 years of sleeping in desert tents and making split-second calls that kept soldiers alive. I wasn't flashy about it. I parked it in my driveway like anyone else would park their car. But within a week, I got my first letter from the HOA. It was typed on official letterhead. Professional. Polite even. It reminded me that all vehicles must be parked inside garages unless actively in use. I read it twice. My driveway was private property. The HOA rules I'd signed mentioned nothing about restricting where I parked on my own land. I called the number at the bottom of the letter. A woman answered on the second ring. Her name was Diane Pritchard, HOA president. She explained that the rule had been updated at the last board meeting. I asked when residents were notified. She said the minutes were posted online. But they weren't. I parked the car in the garage that night anyway. It wasn't worth the fight. Not yet. But that letter stayed in the back of my mind. It was the tone. Not a reminder. A command. Like I'd already broken a rule I didn't know existed. That should have been my first warning. It wasn't the last time Diane would rewrite the rules to fit her agenda. 2 weeks later, I was pulling weeds near my front steps when she appeared at the edge of my driveway. She was wearing a pantsuit the color of a traffic cone. Clipboard in hand. She didn't greet me. She just started talking. My hedges were 3 inches too tall. My mailbox post needed repainting. The stone border around my garden bed was unapproved. She ran through the list like she was reading charges in a courtroom. I asked if any of this was actually enforceable. She smiled. It wasn't friendly. She said everything was in the covenant. I told her I'd read the covenant. Twice. She said maybe I missed the updated addendums. Then she walked away. I went inside and pulled up the HOA portal. There were no addendums. No updates. No documentation of any kind. I checked my move-in packet. Same rules. Same language. Nothing about hedge height. Nothing about mailbox paint. I took screenshots of everything. At the time, I thought I was overreacting. I wasn't. A week later, my next-door neighbor knocked on my door. His name was Paul. Older guy. Retired teacher. He looked uncomfortable. He said Diane had been going house to house handing out violation notices. His trash cans were the wrong color. Someone else got cited for a weathered fence. Another family was told their children's bikes couldn't be visible from the street. He said people were afraid to push back. Diane had a lawyer on retainer. She'd threatened liens. Foreclosure. Most of the neighborhood just paid the fines and moved on. Paul said he wanted to warn me. He'd seen her taking photos of my car. That night, I checked my driveway camera footage. She'd been there. 3 separate times. Standing at the curb with her phone out, zooming in on the Rolls-Royce. She wasn't documenting a violation. She was studying it. I didn't understand why then. I should have. The next letter came on a Friday. Same letterhead. Same polite tone. But this one was different. It said my vehicle was in violation of the community's aesthetic standards. That high-value or luxury vehicles created an appearance of economic disparity that conflicted with the neighborhood's equal and modest character. I read that line 5 times. It still didn't make sense. She wanted me to stop parking a car I owned on property I paid for because it looked too expensive. The letter ended with a deadline. 10 days to comply or face escalating fines. $500 per day. I called her. She didn't answer. I called the HOA management company. They said Diane handled enforcement directly. I emailed the board. No response. I checked the covenant again. There was no clause about vehicle value. No language about economic disparity. Nothing. She'd invented the rule. And she expected me to follow it. That's when I realized this wasn't about the car. It was about control. Diane had decided I didn't belong. And she was going to do whatever it took to make me leave. I didn't move the car. I wanted to see how far she'd go. I didn't have to wait long. The fines started arriving every 3 days. $500. Then $1,000. Then $1,500. Each notice came with a new justification. Vehicle presents safety hazard. Vehicle obstructs sightlines. Vehicle violates community harmony standards. I kept every letter. I also kept the car exactly where it was. I wasn't being stubborn. I was being strategic. In the military, we had a saying, let your enemy think they're winning until you're ready to move. Diane thought she was breaking me. She had no idea I was building a case. But she didn't stop at letters. One morning, I found an orange sticker plastered across my driver's side window. It said the vehicle was marked for towing under HOA authority. I peeled it off and checked my security camera. Diane had placed it herself at 6 in the morning. She wasn't even trying to hide anymore. She wanted me to know it was her. I called a lawyer that afternoon. He listened to everything. Then he said the same thing Paul had warned me about. Diane had done this before. She'd buried 2 families in legal fees until they sold their homes and left. He said I could fight it, but it would cost me more than the car was worth. I thanked him and hung up. He didn't understand. This wasn't about money. 2 days later, my car was keyed. Deep gouges ran down both sides. The paint was stripped to bare metal in 4-foot lines. I checked the footage. It happened at 2 in the morning. The person wore a hoodie and gloves. I couldn't see their face. But I saw their car. A white SUV with an HOA parking sticker on the windshield. I filed a police report. The officer took notes and said he'd follow up. He never did. I sent the footage to Diane and the HOA board. I asked for a formal investigation. No one replied. That's when I realized they weren't just ignoring me. They were protecting her. The next week, I got a certified letter. It wasn't from Diane. It was from her attorney. It claimed I was in breach of the HOA covenant and that continued non-compliance would result in a lien being placed on my property. The letter listed 11 violations. Half of them were fabricated. The other half were things like my trash cans being visible for 6 minutes past the designated pickup window. I read it 3 times. This wasn't enforcement anymore. This was a campaign. And it was escalating faster than I'd expected. I didn't know then, but that letter was just the setup for what came next. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting. It was held in the community clubhouse on a Tuesday night. 12 people showed up. Most of them looked uncomfortable. Diane sat at the front with 2 other board members. She saw me walk in and her expression didn't change. I waited until public comment. I stood up. I explained calmly that I'd received multiple violation notices with no basis in the actual covenant. I showed printed copies of the rules. I asked the board to clarify which section authorized vehicle restrictions based on value. Diane didn't let anyone else speak. She said the board had discretion to interpret the covenant in the community's best interest. I asked who decided what that meant. She said the board did. I asked when residents could vote on interpretations. She said that wasn't how it worked. Then she moved to the next agenda item. I sat down. No one else said a word. That's when I understood. They weren't afraid of her. They were afraid of becoming me. 3 days later, I woke up to my car alarm blaring. I ran outside. The Rolls-Royce was covered in something white and sticky. It smelled like chemicals. Paint thinner, maybe. Or industrial cleaner. The clear coat was bubbling. The metal underneath was discolored. I called the police again. Different officer. Same response. File a report. We'll look into it. I knew they wouldn't. I also knew Diane was watching. My camera had been spray painted over the night before. Whoever did this made sure I couldn't prove anything. But they made one mistake. My neighbor Paul had a camera, and it was pointed at my driveway. I went to his house. He looked nervous. He said Diane had been asking questions about who was friendly with me. He said he didn't want trouble. I told him I understood. Then I asked if I could see his footage. He hesitated. Then he nodded. We watched it together. The video showed someone in a dark jacket pouring liquid from a jug onto my car. They moved fast, efficient, like they'd done it before. The camera caught their face for less than 2 seconds when they turned toward the street. It wasn't Diane. It was her husband. Paul asked what I was going to do. I said I didn't know yet. That was a lie. I knew exactly what I was going to do. But I needed one more thing to happen first. And Diane gave it to me 4 days later. She showed up at my house with a sledgehammer. I was inside when I heard the first impact. Glass shattering. Metal crumpling. I walked to my front window and watched her destroy my car in broad daylight. She swung that hammer like she'd been waiting months for the chance. Windshield. Side mirrors. She didn't stop until the car looked like it had been in a collision. Then she turned toward my house. She was smiling. Not embarrassed. Not worried. Proud. Like she'd finally won. I pulled out my phone and started recording. She saw me. She didn't care. She pointed the hammer at me and mouthed something I couldn't hear. Then she walked away. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Because what Diane didn't realize was that the moment she touched my car, she just committed a felony. And I had it all on video. I didn't call the police this time. I called my lawyer. Not the one who told me to walk away. A different one. Someone who specialized in property law and had a reputation for destroying HOAs in court. Her name was Rachel E.N.G. She watched the video of Diane swinging that sledgehammer 3 times without saying a word. Then she looked at me and said we had enough to bury her. Criminal charges. Civil suit. Breach of fiduciary duty. She said Diane had just handed us a case most attorneys only dream about. I asked how long it would take. She said we'd file within 48 hours. I told her to do it. The lawsuit hit Diane 2 days later. Destruction of property. Vandalism. Harassment. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. We sued her personally and the HOA as an entity. The demand was for $400,000 in damages for the car, plus another $200,000 for emotional distress and legal fees. Rachel also filed a restraining order. Diane wasn't allowed within 500 feet of my property. The HOA tried to claim immunity. Rachel laughed when she read their response. She said they just admitted Diane was acting on behalf of the board. That made all of them liable. The neighborhood found out within hours. Paul told me people were talking. Some were relieved. Others were scared. A few families came forward with their own stories. Liens they couldn't fight. Fines for violations that didn't exist. One couple had been forced to repaint their house 3 times because Diane said the color wasn't pre-approved. Another family lost their home because they couldn't afford the legal bills. Rachel added their testimonies to the case. She said it showed a pattern. Abuse of authority. Selective enforcement. Retaliation. The judge agreed to an expedited hearing. Diane hired her own attorney. Someone expensive. He filed motions to dismiss. Argued that HOA enforcement was protected under state law. Claimed Diane was acting within her authority as president. Rachel tore every argument apart. She presented the video. The chemical attack. The sledgehammer. She showed the fabricated violation notices. The fake rules. She proved Diane had no authority to tow my car, fine me, or touch my property. The judge asked Diane's attorney if he had any evidence that contradicted the video. He didn't. The motion to dismiss was denied. That's when Diane made her second mistake. She tried to countersue. She claimed I was harassing her. That I'd been antagonizing the HOA by refusing to comply with reasonable rules. That my car was a deliberate provocation meant to disrupt the community. Rachel let her file it. Then she requested Diane sit for a deposition. Under oath. I wasn't allowed in the room, but Rachel told me what happened afterward. Diane couldn't keep her story straight. She contradicted herself 4 times in the first hour. She admitted she'd personally issued violation notices without board approval. She admitted the vehicle value rule didn't exist in the covenant. And when Rachel asked why she destroyed my car, Diane said it was because I refused to respect her authority. Rachel said the court reporter's face went blank. That one sentence was going to cost her everything. The criminal charges moved faster than I expected. The prosecutor watched the video once and filed felony vandalism. Diane's attorney tried to negotiate a plea. The prosecutor refused. He said this wasn't a neighbor dispute. It was deliberate destruction of high-value property caught on camera. The trial date was set for 6 weeks out. But Diane didn't make it that far. 3 weeks before trial, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. They voted to remove her as president. Unanimously. Then they settled the lawsuit. $650,000. $400 for the car. $250 for damages and fees. They also agreed to dissolve the current board and hold new elections. Rachel said it was one of the largest HOA settlements she'd ever seen. I told her it wasn't about the money. But it sent a message. Diane's husband was arrested 2 days later. Paul's camera footage was enough. He pleaded no contest to vandalism and criminal mischief. He was fined $15,000 and sentenced to 6 months probation. Diane's trial was still pending. Her attorney tried one last motion to suppress the video. The judge denied it. He said she'd committed a violent crime in broad daylight with full awareness she was being recorded. There was no legal defense for that. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury took 40 minutes to convict her. Felony vandalism. Destruction of property. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay full restitution. The judge said her actions represented a betrayal of the trust placed in HOA leadership. He said people like her didn't deserve authority over anyone. I didn't go to the sentencing. I didn't need to. I'd already won. But Rachel sent me a copy of the transcript. At the end, the judge asked Diane if she had anything to say. She stood up and said I'd ruined her life. That I was vindictive. That I should have just moved the car. The judge cut her off. He said the only person who ruined her life was sitting in front of him. Then he dismissed the court. I thought that would be the end. But 2 weeks later, I got a call from a reporter. She said the story was going viral. Local news had picked it up. Then national outlets. People were calling Diane the sledgehammer HOA president. She'd become a symbol of everything wrong with neighborhood power structures. The reporter asked if I had any comment. I said I just wanted to live in peace. She said I'd done more than that. I'd given people hope that they could fight back. I thanked her and hung up. The Rolls-Royce was totaled. Insurance covered most of it. I used the settlement to buy a new one. Same model. Same color. I parked it in the driveway. No one said a word. But the damage to Diane was permanent. And irreversible. The new HOA board was elected 3 months after Diane's conviction. None of the old members ran. Most of them had resigned the day the settlement was announced. The new president was a retired accountant named Margaret. She knocked on my door the week after the election. She said she wanted to apologize. Not just for Diane, but for everyone who stayed silent while it happened. She said the board was reviewing every violation notice issued in the past 5 years. They'd already found dozens that had no legal basis. Families who'd paid thousands in fines for rules that didn't exist. Margaret said they were working on refunds. I told her that was the right thing to do. She thanked me. Then she asked if I'd consider joining the board. I declined. I'd seen enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime. But the neighborhood changed after that. People started talking to each other again. Not just polite nods at the mailbox. Real conversations. Paul told me families were attending board meetings for the first time in years. They were asking questions. Challenging policies. Holding leadership accountable. He said what happened to me had woken people up. They realized they'd been living under someone else's version of control for so long they'd forgotten they had a voice. I didn't see it that way. I just refused to be a victim. But I understood what he meant. Fear only works when people let it. Diane's husband moved out of the neighborhood 6 weeks after his conviction. He sold the house at a loss. No one knew where he went. Diane's property went into foreclosure 8 months later. The legal fees and restitution had drained everything. She tried to appeal her conviction twice. Both times it was denied. She served 14 months of her sentence before being released on parole. I heard she moved 2 states away. I never saw her again. But her name stayed in the neighborhood long after she left. People used it as a warning. Don't pull a Diane. Don't let power go to your head. It became shorthand for HOA overreach. I didn't find that satisfying. I found it sad. She destroyed her own life over a car she had no right to touch. The settlement money sat in my account for weeks before I touched it. I thought about what to do with it. I didn't need it. The car was replaced. The legal fees were covered. I could have donated it, invested it, spent it on something extravagant. Instead, I used it to hire a lawyer for 2 families in the neighborhood who were still fighting bogus liens. One couple had been threatened with foreclosure over a fence Diane claimed violated setback requirements. The survey proved it didn't. The other family had racked up $12,000 in fines for a shed that was built with HOA approval 3 years earlier. Diane had retroactively declared it non-compliant. Both cases were dismissed within 60 days. Rachel handled them pro bono after I paid her retainer. She said it was the least she could do. I told her she'd already done enough. She disagreed. The media attention faded after a few months, but the story never fully disappeared. I still get messages from people across the country dealing with similar situations. HOAs that abuse power. Boards that invent rules. Neighbors who weaponize authority because they can. Some of them ask for advice. I tell them the same thing every time. Document everything. Don't back down when you're right. And understand that fighting costs something. You have to decide if it's worth it. For me it was. Not because of the car. Because I refused to let someone take my dignity. The Rolls-Royce still sits in my driveway. I haven't gotten a single violation notice since the day Diane was convicted. No one has questioned where I park. No one has measured my hedges. No one has photographed my property without permission. The neighborhood is quieter now. Not the fake quiet that comes from fear. The real kind. The kind that comes from people minding their own business and respecting boundaries. It should have always been that way. But it took a sledgehammer and a felony conviction to get there. I think about that sometimes. How quickly power corrupts when no one pushes back. Diane didn't start out swinging a hammer at someone's car. She started with a letter, a polite suggestion, a rule that didn't exist. And when no one challenged her, she kept going. Each time she got away with it, she pushed harder. Until she believed she was untouchable. That's the lesson people miss. It's not the final act that destroys someone. It's the 100 small ones before it that no one stopped. I just happened to be the person who said no. And I had the resources and the patience to see it through. Not everyone does. That's the part that still bothers me. Paul stopped by last week. He said someone had nominated me for a community service award. I told him that was ridiculous. He said people saw me as the guy who stood up when no one else would. I told him I just didn't want to move my car. He laughed. But he wasn't wrong. I didn't do it for the neighborhood. I did it because I was tired of being told what to do by someone who had no right to tell me anything. The fact that it helped other people was just a side effect. But maybe that's how change happens. Not from heroes. From people who get tired of being pushed around and decide enough is enough. The awards ceremony is next month. I haven't decided if I'm going. Part of me wants to skip it. Move on. Let the story fade. But another part of me knows that silence is what allowed Diane to thrive in the first place. If showing up reminds even one person that they don't have to tolerate abuse from their HO, maybe it's worth it. I learned something through all of this. Power doesn't come from a title or a clipboard or a gavel. It comes from knowing your rights and refusing to surrender them. Diane had authority. But I had something stronger. I had patience, discipline, and the willingness to let her destroy herself. In the military, we called that strategic restraint. Let the enemy make the fatal mistake. Then capitalize on it. She never stood a chance. If this could happen in my neighborhood, it could happen in yours. The question is, what would you do? Would you move the car? Pay the fine? Stay silent and hope it goes away? Or would you stand your ground and make them prove they have the right to push you? I can't answer that for you. But I can tell you this. The moment you let fear make your decisions, you've already lost. And some battles are worth fighting, even when the cost is high. Especially when the cost is high.